What's going on, everyone? Chef Eric Adjepong here, and I cannot wait to read Sankofa. It's a story of culinary resilience and belonging, written by me and illustrated by Lala Watkins. The last class bell rang, and Miss Boone watched as her children packed their bags with smiles on their faces, ready to go home to their families. But she noticed there was one boy who wasn't smiling, Kofi. And don't forget, Miss Boone said to the children, Monday is our annual potluck lunch, so bring a dish that represents your family's culture. Culture. As soon as Miss Boone said that word, Kofi felt a knot twist in his stomach. He's been dreading the potluck all week. On their way home, Kofi and his classmates talked about the dishes for the potluck. One boy said he was bringing spaghetti and meatballs. Another said mac and cheese. Kofi envied how easy it was for all the kids to come up with their dishes that the class would surely love. When it was Kofi's turn to share his dish, he told them that his parents were still deciding. But Kofi knew that wasn't the truth. He hadn't even spoke to his parents about the potluck. Well, I'm sure whatever you bring in will be great, one of his classmates said, and waved goodbye. All of the other kids lived closer to the school, but Kofi lived farthest away in a different neighborhood. Even though Kofi loved his family and all the food they made at home, their food was so different from all the dishes that other kids were bringing in. It made him feel even more like an outcast, as if he didn't belong. As far back as he could remember, Kofi always felt different, even from his own family. He was born in America, but his mother, Mame, and his father, Papa, and his grandfather, Nana Barima, and his sister, Onoba, were born in Ghana, a country in the west region of Africa. He only knew about Ghana from the stories his family told him. To Kofi, Ghana seemed like a very different place than the city he was used to. They all called Ghana home, but Kofi never been to Africa. Home was a place he's never been to. Kofi, my beautiful son, Mame called out from the kitchen. Bring me a palmful of fonio from the cupboard and then set it on the table for us. Papa will be home in any minute from work. He's been working all week and needs a nice hot meal to feed his soul. The family began eating, their conversations filling the air between big bites and delicious foods. What to say? Papa asked in Tree, his native Ghanaian language. How was school today, Kofi? Well, Kofi began. The knots in his stomach started turning. Miss Boone asked everyone to bring a dish for our class potluck next week. Kofi watched as both Mama and Papa put their forks down. Silence. He knew this wasn't good. And what day is the potluck, Kofi? Mama asked, breaking up the silence. Monday, Kofi said. Monday? Mama shouted. Kofi, adeng. She said in Tree, I wish you had told us sooner. Your father's working all weekend and I have to volunteer at the church. There's not enough time for us to just whip up a dish, and we have to make another trip to the market. Again, silence. I will help you, Kofi, Nana Barima said. And just like that, the same knot in Kofi's stomach began to twist again. We'll go to the market first thing in the morning and let the ingredients speak to us, Nana Barima continued. Speak to us, Kofi said. That's right, my dear Kofi, Nana Barima said. Every ingredient has a story, but you have to know and listen. I'll teach you. Now finish your food before it turns cold. Your mother worked very hard in giving us this meal, and we shouldn't waste it. Kofi laid in bed that night looking at the moon, the same moon that hung over Africa, thousands of miles away. Waiting for sleep to come his way, his mind was filled with lots of thoughts. He was anxious about going to the market, a place he's never been before with Nana Barima, a man he hardly knew despite being his family. Saturday. Do you hear that, Kofi? Nana Barima asked. Kofi listened as the vendors spoke quickly to each other and to the customers. Some spoke in Tree, some spoke in English, and some in languages that he's never heard before. Those are the sounds of our people, Nana Barima said, as he watched Kofi look around in a new world before him. When I was your age, Kofi, my mame would take me out to the market just like this in Kumasi, Nana Barima said. Where is Kumasi? Kofi asked. Kumasi is a city in Ghana, Nana Barima explained. I was born there, into the Ashanti tribe, which means you too, Kofi, are a member of the Ashanti tribe. Am I? Kofi said. Of course you are. You are the son, Mumame ne Papa, and they are both Ashanti, just like me and my parents. But I've never been to Africa, Kofi said. You will, in time. But you don't need to go to Africa and experience it. Kofi eyed all the vibrant colors and spices. Nana Barima explained how each spice mix is a combination of many different plants and herbs. Are some better than others? Kofi asked. They are all unique in their own way, Nana Barima said. This is the beauty of spices. Each spice has their own story to tell. Breathe in deeply and tell me what you smell, Nana Barima said. Kofi breathed in deeply, just like his Nana Barima said to. And at first, he didn't smell much, but when suddenly, "See, Kofi," Nana Barima began. "The harvesters take fresh turmeric, peel it, boil it, and then dry it out. Once it's dried, they grind it into a powder and add other dry spices like fennel, calabash, nutmeg, grains of salam, cinnamon. We pride ourselves on being resourceful with our food, even when there's not enough food to go around. To make the limited food as delicious as possible, we learn to use spices. Curry is a mix of different spices. Each spice is important on its own. But when you blend it together, there's even a more wonderful story to tell." When the duo arrived at the next vendor, Kofi saw 3 different color plantains: green, yellow, and black. Nana Barima explained how the green ones are unripe and need to be cooked before eating. "They are perfect for making chips and fufu," Nana Barima said. "And what about the black ones?" Kofi asked. "Taste one," Nana Barima said. "Let the plantain tell you its story." Kofi peeled back the plantain and took a bite, when suddenly, "See, Kofi," Nana Barima said. "The harvesters pick up the plantains from the trees and just at the right time for ripeness." Kofi and Nana Barima made their way to the rice vendors next. Nana Barima told Kofi about all the different rice types. Some grains are long, some are short, some are white, some are brown. And just like the spices, each rice has their own purpose and its own story. "What is this one?" Kofi asked. He picked up the sack of rice. "That, my dear Kofi, is called Carolina Gold rice," Nana Barima said. "It's some of the best rice in the whole world, and it's grown in America, but it always wasn't here." "How did it get here?" Kofi asked. "Well, I'll tell you a story." Kofi held the rice in his palm and let his mind drift. "In the 1600s, our people were captured," Nana Barima began. "They were led against their will onto ships, torn away from their families, and forced into slavery. To enslave someone is to claim ownership over someone else's life, controlling what they can do every day. Before they were captured, some of the enslaved people braided rice into their hair, hoping to have something familiar to grow and eat when they arrived in a new land. That new land was America. But our ancestors were resilient. That means they had the strength to carry on even under brutal conditions. They were still able to find meaningful ways to connect with one another, to their African roots, to their culture, even when they were no longer home. And they did this through food. They were given very little. They only had scraps of food that their enslavers didn't want. But even though they didn't have much, they knew how to make the most of their ingredients." Kofi took a long moment to himself. It was the first time he's heard this story. "Our ancestors brought their spices to America," Nana Barima said. "They were the ones who grew plantains here. They were the ones who cultivated the land to grow rice. Without our ancestors, these foods wouldn't even be here today. This is why we must understand where we come from to understand who we are. The story of food also is the story of who we are, and you should be proud of who you are." "I am proud," Kofi said. "Then why didn't you tell Mama and Papa about the potluck lunch?" Nana Barima asked. "Were you ashamed of your culture?" "I guess," Kofi began. "I've always felt so different from the other kids at school, and I didn't want to feel any more different by bringing food that no one has ever tasted before." "My dear Kofi," Nana Barima said, "you will soon learn that through food, there is more that connects us than separates us. I promise you that. Now let's go home and cook. I have something I want to show you." "This cookbook is our family's oldest heirloom," Nana Barima said, handing the book to Kofi. "An heirloom is something that gets passed down from one generation to the next. My mother gave this to me, and I gave it to your mother, and one day she will give it to you," he said. Kofi held the book and read the title, Sankofa. In our language tree, we have a saying, Sankofa won kri. It means that we must look back into the past for traditions and stories that have been left behind. Nana Barima said, otherwise our culture would vanish. Culture, that was that word again. But this time, there was no knot in Kofi's stomach. In fact, there was a warm swelling in his chest. For the first time in a while, Kofi felt like he belonged. He was proud of who he was and his African culture. He couldn't wait to share his dishes with the class. "Now let's get cooking," Nana Barima said. "We've got a meal to make." And so the two began cooking, letting the ingredients speak to them. Monday. "This is jollof, a dish from Ghana, my home in West Africa," Kofi said to the class. "And I have a story to tell you about the different ingredients in this dish." Miss Boone watched as Kofi told the story of his people, of the dish, and of his African culture to the class. A great big smile ran across Kofi's face. This is a story about my life, even though it's a fictional tale, Sankofa. I had so much fun not only writing it, but reading it and creating the story. So thank you for sharing the time with me.